Living in a world where positive habits follow you wherever you go might feel impossible to you, but my goal today is to show you how to implement two of the most effective tools presented in Atomic Habits to make this shit easy. I spent much of my early adult life engaging in both positive and negative habits that had varying effects on my mental and physical health. I was under the impression that I knew best to just try a bunch of different habits and saw what really resonated with me over time and then stick to those. Of course, as you might imagine, this led me down a path of discontent and a constant shortage of time to work, study, and even play. And something was off with this, and I needed some stability in my habits. Then I had another false thing that kind of clouded my mind, and that was the idea that because I was always moving, which was between every 9 and 12 months, moving for school and then for work, and I was just doing this so often that I was under the impression that once I were to move again, I would probably change my habits because I was in a new location. It turns out this mentality was far from right and in completely the wrong direction, which I soon learned after reading Atomic Habits by James Clear, and it kind of allowed me to learn how to track and stack, which is what we're going to be talking about today, my habits in order to build a much healthier and more productive lifestyle. And most importantly, I can bring these with me wherever I go. I've moved a few times now and nothing really changes as I go through it, and I just use these habits wherever I go. All right, so first up, what are habits and why do we even care about them in the first place? So at its most basic form, a habit is a simple neural pathway that's just strengthened over time as you do it more and more often. It can be, of course, positive, like waking up early, or it can be negative, like smoking. This creating of neural pathways and strengthening them is called long-term potentiation, or LTP. In this way, our brain is what's called neuroplastic. It shapes and molds to make way for new habits that we want to learn and ones that we use all the time, and then it just synaptic prunes, which is a term coined for getting rid of old pathways and old neurons, and lets them die off so we have more space for the things that we want to do. Through LTP then, over time, we keep doing this feedback loop of that habit and we keep getting the same reward, which is the outcome of that habit. And over time, it just kind of becomes automatic. Research goes to show that neural pathways take a long time to develop. It can be anywhere from as short as 18 days to over 250 days. It depends on how important the habit is to us, what methods we employ to get the habit to stick, and how many we're learning at the same time. One at a time is advised to be the very best for the most effective outcome. James Clear and Charles Duhigg both studied habits and have great books about them, have come to the realization that there are 4 stages of what's called a habit cycle, which starts with a cue, then goes to a craving, then goes to a response, and then a reward. And by using these 4 stages of a habit and how it repeats every single time we do a habit, we can then intercept one of these stages in order to enhance and learn habits more quickly. So the goal today is how to get as close as possible to learning that new habit in as close as 18 days at the short end of that range as we possibly can. Of the 2 most important lessons I learned in Atomic Habits, which I'm going to talk about today, the one that really changed my entire perspective and my entire thinking towards habits is the idea of what's called habit stacking. So what is it exactly? It is essentially the piggybacking of habits on one another. So when you perform one habit, you'll automatically perform another one at the same time or right after it. The key with stacking habits here is that it'll allow you to remember to do that habit much more easily if it's triggered by a habit you already do on a regular basis. If you're trying to learn a new habit and it has nothing to do with anything else and no other habits you have, it's very tricky to learn because you'll most of the time just forget to do that habit. So this intercepts at that first stage of those 4 stages of habits, and that is the cue. When we do that first habit that we already have in place, we're actually using that habit itself as a cue for that next habit to stack on top of it and allows you to learn it much more quickly. So let's take an interesting example here. Say you always drive your car and your significant other really wants you to check the oil all the time, right? What can you do to remember to do that? Well, what do you do every morning before you go to work? You go to your car and you unlock your car and you go and sit in the driver's seat. But what if that was the cue to then check your oil? What if you put some kind of reminder or something on your seat, or you simply just learn to associate getting in your car with popping your hood and then going to check the oil? That is the idea of stacking here. And in James Clear's language, he boils it down like this. after I unlock my car and sit in the driver's seat, I will go and check my engine oil level. Very straight and simple. What's really cool about this is it's not limited to just one thing that you can stack on top of each other. Once you've got that first one stacked and it's now a habit, you can create what's called a habit chain. This is when you can stack multiple habits on top of each other. So maybe a few months down the line, you now check your oil every time. And now you get in your car, get in the driver's seat, you go check your oil, you come back, check your fuel gauge, and then turn on a podcast and drive off to work. This is a habit chain of 4 different things that are just built on top of each other. So now let's talk about the second lesson from Atomic Habits that really resonated with me, and that is the idea of habit tracking. Yes, rhymes with stacking, perfect. So if you're unfamiliar with what this is, James Clear lays it out in his book, and he also has a template for it, but it is the idea to track habits in a tracker, either on paper or on your computer. And this allows you to kind of keep a running tally of which habits you are completing in a day. So if you have a handful of habits that you have going on and you want to add one habit, you can simply cross it off every day you do it. And by doing this, you're creating kind of a chain reaction of every single day and a streak that you're creating over time that you really don't want to break and can be really powerful in motivating you to keep going with that chain. James argued that this is a really good way to build accountability with yourself, to not let yourself down, and to kind of gamify the process of learning a new habit by keeping that streak going. This brings us to what is the best kind of tool to use for habit tracking, and there's so many different kinds and so many different videos on YouTube about habit trackers that all differ very slightly. I've kind of created my own, which is super simple. I'll link it down below so you can check it out if you'd like, and you can use that one, of course. But there is also one that James Clear has that is paid, but it is a paper version, which some might like as well. And there is one that I came across that was really quite interesting on a video that I watched recently. It was introduced to me by a YouTuber named Thomas Frank. You might be familiar with him, but he's got some great videos on his channel that explain this kind of stuff. And his problem with habit tracking was that it had no end goal in sight, and there was no real checkpoint to evaluate how he was doing over time. It was just kind of like an endless chain of checking off each day. In his version, he uses a bullet journal, which is a journal with just dots on it, which is pretty cool. I've used it before in the past. And he breaks it down into 15-day intervals where he lists all his habits on the days that he wants to complete them. He puts down a plus, a minus, or a 0, and the 0 is if there was some circumstance where you couldn't complete your habit, it wasn't a conscious choice. And then after 15 days, he scores how he did, and he reevaluates, he removes or adds habits that aren't as good anymore, or he doesn't want to perform them, or ones he wants to add in. And then he just restarts the cycle and just keeps on evaluating, keeping score of how he's doing over time. And the goal for him is to get better. So I kind of like this idea. It allows you to go back and check what you're really sticking to, what obviously means a lot to you, and areas that you need to get better, which traditional habit tracking doesn't do. All right, so we've talked about 2 of the different takeaways, but let me blow your mind a little bit right now. Obviously, I've found both of these 2 different ways of managing habits in my life to be very effective, but what if we could magnify their effects even more? Learn habits faster and even stick to them when we don't want to, no matter what. Well, my friends, I want to introduce you to the idea of stacking your habit tracking, which is great alliteration, but it's also very powerful. But what does that even mean? Although the alliteration is great, if you were able to stack the habit of habit tracking onto another habit, how would that change things? That's the question I was asking myself. So this is kind of an inception moment. When you get to the habit tracking, you're then tracking that you're habit tracking as your habit, but you're also tracking the habit before it, because that was the cue for that habit. Holy shit. That's a bit of an infinite loop, and that hurts my head a bit, so let's get into an example to make it a bit easier to understand. Imagine you make your bed in the morning as your habit that you already do on a regular basis, but as a new habit now, you place your habit tracker on your pillow. When you return at night, you see your habit tracker and you go to track, and you can then track that you left your habit tracker on your pillow as a new habit, and also track that you made your bed. There's 2 mechanisms at play here. First of all, we're stacking the habit tracking on top of the habit we already did, which is that first component that we talked about earlier in the video. The second is the idea of tracking. Once you see your habit tracker laying on your pillow at night, you're reminded that habit tracking was something that you wanted to learn as a new habit. And then once you see it, of course, you're reminded of that habit and you go back and track that you left your habit tracker on your pillow, that you made your bed, and now that you are actually tracking. So you can do 3 different layers here. You can go as deep as you want, but essentially it's just a way to fast track your habits and really utilize the core principles of this. And if you're thinking this is powerful, you're damn right it is. I tried it a couple days now, and it's only been a couple days, and I already do it without thinking because I'm tracking and then I'm putting it on my, we won't get into it again, but it's really powerful. Just trust me, try it out. It's pretty crazy. So in the simplest terms then, you're utilizing both of these components all at once. You're implementing both of them, and you're doing habit stacking and then tracking the habit stacking. Again, I won't get into it and confuse you more, but it's just the combination of habit stacking and habit tracking. They meet and your habits will become better. If that was a lot for you, I completely understand. It was really hard to write this script, and honestly just go back and watch it again because it's some great information. I really hope you can use this, and I will see you guys in the next video.